Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session. Today's session will be led by Terry. To start, I'll just give a brief about who BotLab is. BotLab is a technology firm. We are based on Gong Road, but I'm currently working from home. We offer two things. We offer technology-based trainings to different audiences. We have trainings for SMEs, we have trainings for the tech community, and we have training for executives. At the same time, we provide data science as a service, meaning that we analyze data on behalf of clients. So feel free to reach out to us. So today's session will be led by Terry. Before I introduce Terry, I would want to talk about a little bit about her firm. SECVATE Solutions is a technology solutions company that specializes in providing software solutions, cybersecurity consultancy, data analytics services to medium and small businesses in medical, real estate, microfinance industries in Africa. They promote the use of IT in day-to-day business processes in a bid to improve efficiency, maximize on profits, and overall improve the customer experience and satisfaction in the product or service they are seeking. The end results normally revolve around the creation of a solution suited to the customer-specific needs. These tend to give the customer fingertip access to the business in question and help provide business intelligence in a bid to aid the decision-making process. Terry Wamboi Macharia, she's a professional, and her professional objective is to utilize her knowledge, skills, and experience to be part of a working nation that participates in the economic, political, and social development of our society. She has 7 years of experience in IT, having worked as a system administrator, system consultant, that is in infrastructure and IT, project management. She brings a whole wealth of experience, and her areas of expertise are business development, strategic planning and leadership, operations management, and project management. She has a Master's of Science in IT from Strathmore, as well as a business degree in Business Information Technology from Strathmore University. Further, she holds the following certifications: Certified Ethical Hacker, Certified Information Systems Audit, and Certified Information Systems Manager. While not working, Terry enjoys traveling, reading, spending time with family, and engaging community outreach programs. Thank you so much, Terry. Welcome. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Mercy. I hope you can hear me. Can you?
Yes, we can.
Okay, fine. I think now you need to see me. Thank you so much for that introduction. I was even asking who that is being introduced. I'm a bit camera shy, so I am going to beg to put my camera off while presenting, but I'll turn it back on when we are handling the question and answer. So without further ado, I will just give you what I'm expecting to do for this session. Probably have run my presentation, what I prepared for an hour. Then we can have an engaging session for 30 minutes because I feel like what I need to do most is interact with you and get to know what your experience in the market has been. Also within the presentation, I'll have certain sessions where I just ask you to engage, and probably to avoid so much interruptions, what we will most likely have is have people engage on the chat section. So I welcome you to do that as we move on. So I'm just gonna go ahead and present my screen. So just give me a minute. So please confirm you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay, fine. So I forgot to put my camera off, so I will just proceed. So this, my task today was to just give you an insight on what you do when you get attacked, which is what we call incident response. And together with Mercy and my company, SECVATE, we thought this would be a good thing to do, especially in this time when we are witnessing a lot of cyber attacks happening. So thank you very much, Mercy, for reaching out, and I hope you can gain value from this. I may not be able to follow up on the chat, so Mercy, I'll request that you can get my attention when probably if it's a question around that particular section, I can stop and address it. Otherwise, the questions can probably wait until the end. So just to get to know who is on call, I would probably want to understand what kind of an audience I have, so that I know on what side to lean on towards. So please just give me your name, your role in the company. Probably just, you may not want to specify what role exactly you're doing, but tell me whether it's more of a technical or non-technical aspect. And then probably let me know what you're expecting from the presentation, so that I see how best I can incorporate it as I present. So I think we can do that as I introduce the objectives of the day. So let me just put this camera off. It's so today my objective is that we understand what is an incident response plan, and then we also understand why we need to have the importance of it. If we can understand that, then it's also important for us to know what are some of the key considerations you have to consider when you're creating this incident response plan. And then we look at the standard practice, which is by a very good known institute in cybersecurity. And they have recommended the 6 steps that you take once you find yourself under an incident or you have been attacked. So in most instances, you may have an incident, but it's not a cyber attack. But majority of the situations we find ourselves in is that it's mostly a cyber-based attack. So people tend to associate incident response to cyber, but it's not necessarily, it must be a cyber-driven kind of attack. So I'm trying to see whether I've got people responding on the chat. So at least I have someone from a non-technical bit. Okay, so, and one who has a technical bit. So please, it will be good that you engage us in the chat to ensure that we are together. So there's a common saying in cyber that we will all get attacked. So it will happen at some point. And the question we always want to find out is when it will happen. It's not a question of if it will happen. It's a question of when it will happen. So no matter how much measures we put in place, does not mean that we will not get hacked. Remember that hackers are awake every day and night to just make sure that they can be able to break into even the toughest systems that we have put in place. So in cyber, and as cyber consultants, what we tell people is you will get hacked at some point. It's just a matter of when. So even when we approach banks, we tell them that your money will get lost, but we don't know when it's going to happen. So we must always be up on top of our game to make sure that it doesn't happen, that we are faster than the hackers are thinking. So just to get an understanding of where you what you think on matter cybersecurity. So if you could probably chat me and tell me why do you think people attack us, either as organizations or as individuals? What do you think is their objective when they're trying to get into us? I'm still getting responses on the kind of team I have. Thanks for those who've responded. So please just give me a filter of what you think is the motivation of hackers into hacking into either you as an individual or you as a company. Thanks, Mwenda. He says steal data or disrupt services. A very perfect answer. Others just do it for fun. That's a very interesting one. I personally at times just challenge myself to try and get into systems of people. Thanks, Priscilla. She says fun. Money, to make a point, yes. This has been witnessed a lot in the ransomwares that we have. They attack for fame, to get money, to steal confidential information and sabotage. So they just want to make sure that you look bad to your competitors. So now that we know why these people attack, then don't you think it's very important that we put in measures to make sure that we don't fall victim to some of these things? So I do subscribe to Sun's newsletter, and they do send updates on what's happening around, especially the European market in terms of cybersecurity. So this update is as fresh as of Saturday 9th. And this is what has been happening in the month of May alone, from 1st to today, 12th. So the first three instances are ransomwares, and the last is what we call a cross-site scripting. So the first incident is called a snake ransomware. And what this hacker's intention was to hack into the European health system systems, and their idea was to steal patient data. And then once they had captured this patient data, was to force these companies to pay them data so that they don't release this data to the public. And you would understand why the hackers would do that, because they understand that the companies first don't want to go against the major HIPAA rules that protect the patient against their private information. And so they knew if they can only be able to capture this information and demand money for it, then the health systems will be forced to give them the money that they wanted. The second incident was done to Australian company that manages transport and logistics, and they wanted to halt the transport system. In this country, people rely a lot on this transport system, and if they could only halt this system, then it means they would disrupt so many people's lives, even despite the COVID thing happening. And this for me was very interesting because it's the second time they've been hacked this year. And what happened is when they were hacked earlier, it was because of what we call malicious email, which I will discuss as an example in a later slide. But this, when they responded to that phishing email, there's some aspects of the system that they didn't, what we call patch well. They didn't do a proper incident response plan, which prompted for the hackers to hack them a second time using what we call remote desktop protocol. And it was just a simple thing. They didn't ensure that they had things like two-factor authentication to ensure that people accessing the systems from a remote area could do that and still not be compromised. That one was they were targeting the production aspect of the energy. They didn't get to hit that, but what is reported is that customers will not be able to buy fuel using their credit and debit cards. Then there's one that is more close to home. I know a number of us like to use WordPress to develop our websites. But this one, I totally blame it on developers who are just lazy. What is happening with this is that there is some outdated plugins. So when you're developing a website using WordPress, you borrow a lot of things from other third party, how would I put it, third party sites. And they constantly keep on updating this information so that it doesn't affect the website. But what happens with developers is they don't pick the latest updated and plug in into your themes that you're borrowing from the website. So there's a lot that has been happening on that end, and one of the things that is mainly affected is the newspaper theme, and I think they have brought it down until they figure out how to take care of that. So I don't know whether there are other incidents that you may have had, especially closer home, than what I have said, but we do get an idea of how this hacking takes place and what people need to put in place to ensure that it doesn't happen. So I would probably want to hear what you think of the things, the incidents I've shared. Also, let me know if you've been hit before or if you've experienced, especially the WordPress. I think it's something that most people use, and I see a lot of people getting hacked on this aspect. So I would want to hear what is your experience on that. So to just proceed and get to understand what is this incident response from a cybersecurity aspect. There are certain terms we use to make sure that we are talking in a response kind of bit. So there's some certain aspects that you need to understand so that even when someone is communicating to you that this is what they are doing, then you're able to flow into the conversation. So there's a difference between what we call an incident and an event. So an event could be just generally anything that happens on a system. It could be the general traffic. How much traffic do people use to download documents from the server? How much traffic do people need to access in terms of bundles that they need to access data from systems of the company? Generally, how does an IT security administrator behave in your company? Based on their job description, there are certain aspects that they access more than others. The way a developer behaves in your company is not the same way an IT security administrator will behave. It's not the same way your CEO will behave. It's not the same way the marketing person will behave. So there are different access to systems that they do, and you want to see what is generally the norm. And once you figured out what is the norm for most of these people, then it becomes very easy to be able to see any abnormalities. So at what point does this event now convert to become an incident? So like I said, if you have a profile of an IT security administrator, there are certain aspects of documents that they access, there are certain systems that they access, and they're allowed to do that. And you can see clearly there is nothing that is raising alarm. There's certain aspects of the developer that they're allowed to access in the system, and it does not raise any alarm. There's a way a marketer behaves generally on your company system that will not raise an alarm, but it becomes an alarm when you see someone like a marketer accessing something you'd expect an IT security administrator to access. So it's very important to understand that not all events are incidents, but all incidents are events. So I want us to think of an example like, let me pick a happy event, which would be maybe a wedding. It's mostly a happy event unless probably you wanted to marry either of the individuals. So at what point the objective of this wedding day is to move the bride from her. I'm not married, so I don't know, but is to move the girl from the parents' home and join them with, is it the groom? And at the end of the day, declare them husband and wife, and also allow people, especially if it's an African wedding, allow people to eat and dance and make merry, and pronounce these people at the end of the day as husband and wife by the time the evening is coming to an end. I may have skipped many, but I expect that a wedding at the end of the day will have a husband and a wife. So what, in your opinion, do you think would cause this event to change from being just a typical event to now being an incident? I would love to hear what you think would convert a typical wedding event to now become an incident, based on the explanations that I have given on the two. One is the priest doesn't show up. Yes, so who joins? We assume that probably there's a pastor within the crowd, so can be managed. Somebody else? Are we still here? Yeah, kidnapping now, that would create an incident. Because then who do you join to this person? We cannot get another person to join. Wow, the girl changes her mind. That one is a tough one. Well, by the time she's walking down the altar, well, I hope she has made up her mind. Yes, last minute drama from parents and relatives, especially the relatives bit. I think I've seen a lot of that. So at that point, when it becomes an incident, so if it's kidnapping, do we postpone this wedding? Is this person still alive? So now you start looking for the person, as in you change your perspective towards getting these people married, and now you need to look for this missing person. If the person changes their mind, then you want to understand, why did you change their mind? Is it something we can talk over and probably proceed with the wedding? So you want to manage now the situation, because it has become an incident now. You presented with this situation, how best do we maneuver and get out of this particular incident? So there's more drama from an ex. Yes, an ex stands up to disrupt the wedding. Malicious girl shows up and claims she had been married to the groom. Yeah, so at that particular time, if I had seen a clip of someone who they were just doing their vows, and a lady just walks in and say the wedding has to stop because I was married to this person. And when the groom turns back, the lady excuses herself and says, "Oh, sorry, it's the wrong church." But I could literally see the face of the groom when this lady was vehemently accusing that they had been married before. So these things happen, and when they happen, what you want to do is to manage the situation as best as it is, to ensure that if you had wanted to really marry this person, then it actually happens. So what we want to discuss is, how do we now manage this situation when it happens? So what is this incident response plan? So it's just a guideline of what your IT staff or your cybersecurity professionals are expected to behave when an incident happens in an organization. If someone unknowingly clicked a malicious email and brought in malware into the system, how, as IT security people, should we respond? If especially this employee did not report to IT department and say that I clicked on a malicious email, but when you are doing your own reviewing of the logs, you notice that this happened. And when we are carrying out this is we do not want to be out of service, especially if you're a service providing company. You want to ensure that your data is safe. And part of the same reasons that we are giving initially is you don't want someone to damage your reputation based on a particular incident. Um, and when we are doing this, there's a team that is tasked to do this, which we call Computer Security Incident Response Team. This is a combination of IT people that have some aspect of cybersecurity and what we call forensics, because in some instances, then we are requested to go to court and give an evidence of what of what we find out, of what we found out when we were carrying out the on what happened on that particular incident. If it's a situation that involves fraud, and you're probably implicating a senior manager based on the trails in the system, then you'll probably go to a court of law and you will be interviewed. So there are also other skills that you need to have in place apart from the IT skills. Um, so the importance of having this plan is three main things. Is it will help you reduce costs. A research was done by this institute in 2017, and they said that companies are losing $11.7 million based on damages to cyber attacks. And if we are able to respond in a manner that is timely and well organized, then some of these costs, I'm not saying that we can be able to get the costs to zero, but we can reduce this cost, because once you are attacked, then there are certain costs that you cannot be able to get rid of. And that goes to reputation and a bit of data protection. If your data has been compromised, it has been compromised. It's just a matter of how do you now prevent this from happening again, and trying to clean whatever this data is that has been compromised. So there's two aspects in an incident. You have either an incident response and an incident handling. Incident response is what we, the technical people, do. This is what requires you to have skills. You must have the networking, the forensic skills, you must have the cybersecurity skills. But in terms of handling, now this is what we call the PR bit of what is happening, the communication bit. Who does communication to who? How do you involve the legal people if it's a legal case? How do they respond? If it's information that needs to go to the press, how do you relay this information to the press? How do I relay this information to management? Because management is not the same way you're going to relay this information to technical people. So the best example of this is just look at what is happening in the COVID situation, and when you're having the press briefings. We always have one side from Mutahi Kagwe, and we have another side of the medical expertise, and they constantly refer to him as Director General. So you realize that the side that leans more towards Mutahi Kagwe, they are mostly on managing the logistics and from a government perspective. So it's just to communicate on what the government is doing. But whenever there is a case of critical or medical related kind of questions, you always note that they always refer that question to this guy they call the DG. I don't know his name, but they always call him DG because he has the medical expertise to be able to explain, and they cannot be able to explain that. So even when you're having an incident in your company, you want to have those two aspects. You want to have the technical team that addresses the actual incident and how it happens, and they're able to even dig into the root cause of the problem and give you the technical expertise of what happened. And then you want to have people who manage the PR. These are the people who go to the press and just make a bad situation look as good, even though it's not really good. So you want to have those two aspects. You want to have people responding to the incident and is trying to stop it from even furthering destroying the company. And then you want to have a team that just manages communication. So I'm going now to get back to you. and I want to understand from the companies that you're running now or the companies that you're working for, do you have an incident response plan? And do you think it is an actively maintained response plan? At this point, I must also explain that incident response is part of disaster recovery. So it's part of the disaster recovery plan. So if you have one, but it must be able to address that particular aspect of the incident response. So how many of us in our current organizations and the organizations we are working in have one in place and think that it is active enough, that it's just not sitting in the shelf somewhere and collecting dust? I would like to see where we stand in our different companies. Do we have one in place, and do we feel like it's active, and do we feel like it involved all departments? All departments know what is required. I can see a question from Wamoyo. She's asking, do companies, I'm waiting for you to chat me, do companies like Safaricom have competent CSIRT, especially in regards to M-Pesa fraud? Well, that's a tough question for me. I want to believe they do have one. I don't know how they manage it, but I probably can't answer that. I don't work for them, and I don't know how they recruit one. So it's a hard question for me. But I guess you're trying to communicate the kind of frustrations that you get, especially when you have money taken from your M-Pesa account. So are we going to get any responses for whether we have some plans in place? Well, Hazel tells me, thanks for that. She says they have a summarized one, and at least they're helping a client create one. So I can see most of us have one. Do we think it's active enough? In my experience, what I've found is that people have very well documented things. And I don't know whether it's a weakness in Kenyans that people say if you want to hide something from Kenyans, you hide it in books and papers, because we rarely read. So my experience has been most people have it, but they don't know they don't even know where it is, but it's in place, but they just can't access it. And based on the statistics I looked at, there are some respondents who responded by a survey done by, I can't say that word, and they said that they only have 77% can say they have a formal incidents plan, and it's consistently applied across the entire organization. In the same survey, nearly half say that they don't have one and it doesn't exist. Others said yes, it's there, but only 32% of it describe it as mature. So at this point now, we get concerned as cybersecurity consultants, because if an incident happens, organizations have reported that it takes so much time to resolve one, and we can clearly attribute this to the lack of planning. If you don't plan, then you definitely will have a hard time in failure. And I always advise people is better you have something in place than not having anything in place, because when we come in to try and assess what happened, some of the things that we need to do is understand how do you manage when these incidents happen. And when they don't happen, when you don't have something in place, then we are forced to come up with something, and then something that will work, which ends up at a cost at your end. So you'd rather minimize that cost and have a bit of something going on, just have something, just don't sit and wait until the incidents happen. That is when you have a plan in place. And then there's another percentage of 65 that says these attacks keep on increasing. Like I said, hackers are up day and night to just make sure that they can break into the complex systems in place, because it's a form of achievement even from our end if you can be able to break into some of the systems that have been done very well. So when you're looking to build an incidents plan, what do you want to put in place? What do you want to ensure that is working well to a point that it seems flawless? There's certain aspects that you need to have in place to ensure that in this plan that I have come up with, I am able to respond when an incident happens. So one of the critical aspects, if any aspect of a plan has to work, or most of the things that happen in companies, then you must have senior management support. One is, if they're the ones who are actually rooting for this thing, then they will make sure that it happens, because it's also important to them. If you are working as a CISO in that company, then you want management to understand that you need to hire qualified people to be able to run this incident response plan, and they will make sure that they support, because they keenly understand why they need this one in place. The other aspect, which is very rarely taken into account, is consistent testing. How many times do we try and run drills on whatever we have as plans in the company? What are we doing to make sure that it's up to date? You find in most instances that even the person who is supposed to call when an incident happens is someone who left the company like 4 years ago. So where do you get that person if an incident has happened today and the person left the company 4 years ago? So you want to make sure that these things are consistently tested and consistently updated as need be. But you also don't want to have a testing that happens every now and then, and a drill that happens every now and then, now it becomes a norm. Because I remember there's a time fire was a big issue in this country, and we were having a lot of fire drills. And at times people would hear the fire alarm, and what they would do is not even rush to their safety, is ask each other, is it a drill or is it true? So you don't want to reach that point that you keep testing and testing, that people are never sure now. This thing has become too common. It's no longer, nothing is happening. We are just testing. So you also want to check on the frequency of how you are testing this. The other aspect is, it's good to have a detailed plan and a step-by-step guide of what people should expect to happen when an incident occurs. But as much as you're having this, then you want to also ensure that it's flexible, that you're not rigid towards these steps. Things don't always work on a step-by-step process. You will realize that in sometimes you find yourself jumping from one step to the other and the like. So it's never a straight line. So you have to allow your team to be able to adjust to this. The other aspect is, if an incident happens, how do we communicate? If it's emails that have been compromised, it's not the way we are going to communicate that this thing has happened. So have clear communication channels. The way you communicate to management, the way you communicate to the technical team, the way you communicate to a department that has been affected and a department that has not been affected, the way you communicate to your customers and to the media, then these things have to vary, and you have to identify how best you can do this. Then you also want to know who are the key stakeholders that need to know what is happening in case an incident happens. So is it your partners, your customers, the legal team? How do they communicate? Management, of course, has to be involved, and also departmental heads. And like we say in management, is keep it simple, stupid. You don't want to have a complicated plan. Make the plan as simple as possible, but putting in place all the critical aspects that need to be put in place. So I am looking at my time. I have like 20 minutes more to go. So what I'm going to do for the next bit as we try to see this is I want to explain what typically should happen when an incident response happens. And then I will take you through a case study or an example of how it happened to someone and how we managed to avert the situation. So before I do that, I probably would want to hear from you. Uh, have you experienced a hack, and how do you think? How did you respond to that particular hack? Um, how did you act on it? Did you even identify it was a hack, or what did you do? So if there's someone who would like to let me know, I think we can let me know on the chat. I think it's a bit too much to type. So you can unmute yourself and maybe we can hear just one example. Then I will explain what the standards say.
Terry, before they unmute,
Yeah.
I just saw Alan said that we have multiple plans tailored for most departments in organizations. They
Yes.
are known by senior managers, but
Yes.
the details are not conveyed down to the junior employees until an incident occurs. How would you encourage firms that will be facing something like this, where policies are usually at the high level, but they're never communicated down to the people who sometimes are the ones who handle the mitigation of the incidences?
Wow. I find that a very bureaucratical kind of organization. Um, and I don't know why they would do that. I tend to think they maybe don't value um, the junior employees, or in some instances, they are trying to reduce the risk where they only give information when a particular when you probably would need that information so that they don't increase your compromise. So what I would advise is this is something that you handle with your immediate manager, and 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 then let the manager escalate throughout the entire process. So just tell them that this is an issue you feel that you people need to know, or probably they need to explain, because I feel you also don't understand why you don't have this information. So for me, I think it's just a communication problem, and you need to probably relay it with your immediate supervisor and explain why you feel like you need this information. So I don't know whether I've answered the question, but that's what I think it is.
Maybe to add, sometimes it's not intentional. Sometimes it's due to the lack of a policy to share documents. I see that a lot, especially in big organizations where there's a lot of decentralization, where you find people only share documents, especially policy documents, within a particular decentralized unit. So it could be that sometimes they don't see it as a priority of why they should share. So one of the suggestions would be maybe to explore having that conversation with some of the managers and having them understand what it would mean and how that conversation would reduce the response time once everyone within the organization understands the jurisdiction of an incident. Then Terry,
Yes.
someone says, I work with an organization where our IR consists of tabletop exercise and scenario testing, threat assessments, and forensic analysis. Oh, there was no question. I think it was, yeah. And then Veron Rose says most organizations are hacked and they don't even realize that they were hacked.
Oh, well, yes, that happens a lot of time, and you only realize when you see a customer complaining, and that's when you want to engage the team. So that shows a clear lack of IT experts in your department, or clear processes of how to do identification and analysis of a hack. So it's just a lack of expertise in the company. It shows that you don't have people who are constantly monitoring your systems, or are checking your cyber security aspects into the company. So you may want to look into that.
Okay, we can revert back to where you
Yep.
were.
Yes, I don't know whether there's someone who wants to speak. I can't see anyone who's unmuted. So is it safe to say we proceed?
Hi, Terry.
Yes.
This is Hazel. Huh?
Yes, Hazel.
Let me just share a brief one where we recently had a client who was, unfortunately, they were hacked by their own employee, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And it has really caused their business a lot of heartache because
Wow.
their database was brought down and business came down and their collateral was stolen, their IP was stolen.
Mm-hmm.
So what we immediately did was change the root password, because even when we went in to check the logs, we could see the person was in the system and they were deleting things. Huh? It was a very bad attack. They wanted to
Yeah.
actually cripple the business, yeah.
Yes.
So then we also went ahead and we reviewed all the users, because some people were in collaboration with others. We
Okay.
changed the rights of some of the users. And we went and looked at their firewalls. We hardened them, added more access lists, and prevented these people from getting in. And then we also enabled multi-factor authentication because they didn't have that before.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a crazy one, because
yeah,
insider threat is the least people ever expect, and it's worse because this person already has access to your system, so they're
yeah.
not trying to break into anything. So the amount of damage can be too immense.
It
So
was
I'm
very
glad,
big.
yeah, I'm glad you managed to rescue them, but I'm sure some damage had to be done.
Some damage. They lost some data, unfortunately.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. Fine. I know Hazel comes from security background, so I want to believe she really did respond this from an expertise point of view. Um, but I've seen a lot of insider threats, and these ones I there's nothing much you can do. When it happens, you just need to do what we call containment, just ensure that it gets removed as soon as possible, because the immensity of the damage can be too bad for you. So thanks, Hazel, so much for sharing that. I hope people manage to pick a few things from there.
And thanks, Terry.
So I am gonna proceed. Um, so what the policies and what has been put in the market and standard practice when you get an attack. There are six processes that we use to ensure that you move from this being an incident to now moving to what we call the norm, to just a normal event. Um, so I like to say that the first phase is more of what you do before the incident happens, which is what I was insisting on. And this is more of a preparation aspect. What systems do you have in place? Are they what we call hardened? Are they patched? Do you have you educated your employees on the importance of not clicking on funny looking links? What have you done to ensure that you are not attacked? So these are just the measures that you put in place uh, to try and reduce an attack from happening. So think of our horses when we sleep at night. We try to make sure that we've locked the door, so that it's harder. Even though the thief is to come in, they have to actually do a struggle. So I used to work with with someone some time back, and he used to tell me that when he leaves his house in the morning, he used to leave alone. He would make sure that he's locked all doors, so that even if someone breaks into the house, uh, they will still have a hard time accessing each and every room. So he wanted to feel like even though he tried to avert this thief from accessing the house, that they took measures. They made this person work for this theft that they are going to carry out. So what are you doing as a company to ensure that you have systems in place and processes that avert as much as possible this threat from happening? The other aspect you want to look at, which someone has already raised, is if an incident occurs, do you have processes? Do you have procedures? How do you report? So, do you have an IT department that you report all incidents to? Do you have actually, is it just not reporting and someone actually looks into them and reverts and tells you this was not, if this happens again, this is what you should avoid? How do you detect that you've been hacked? Someone clearly said that they don't even know they get hacked. So it's just a lack of processes within the company to be able to identify actually that an incident happened. The other thing you want to ensure is if actually it has happened, how widespread it is. In the Hazel kind of scenario we are being given, this employee already had access, and she says that she already was working with a number of her employees internally. So it was more of a collaboration. So you want to, you may avert this, the initial initiator of this incident, but if you don't, if you're not able to analyze who else is into this carrying out this incident, how do you then contain it? How do you know what is the scope? How do you spread? How do you stop the spread from happening? So that is what you do. You just make sure that this is this incident is something that is managed within a certain scope. The fourth aspect is once you have contained it, then what you want to do is remove it from the system. You want to, if it's a system that is affected, you want to, or a computer just basically, is remove it from the network already affecting other systems in place. Then you want to be able to now do the hardening, do the patching to ensure that even though we are bringing it back into the network, then it's still not vulnerable to these particular attacks. And then the final thing is you want to recollect and see uh, what can we learn, what can we pick from what has just happened, and how can we ensure that this does not happen in future. Remember the example I was giving you of the transport company that they had the incidents, they went through the process, but they didn't do thorough job, and then they have been just hacked recently on May 5th because there was a certain vulnerability in responding to the initial earlier attack. So you want to make sure that you've spent a lot of time, especially on the first and last stage, because then if you don't do a good job on the initial stage, then you definitely get hacked. If you don't do a good job on the last stage, then you will have to endure the entire process again. And there are the two key things that get most affected. People, once an incident has happened and you've called in a team of experts to come and assess the situation, none of us sits down and tries to analyze and get some what we call lessons learned from the situation and update everyone on what happened and how to avoid it from happening before we just okay it was done, you just stop it at that. So at this point you want to be able to give a report and have everyone understand what happened and how to make sure that it doesn't happen in future. So because I didn't know what kind of audience I'd have in place, what I did is I did a typical what we call a phishing email, or what we call malicious emails, and what damage it can do to the network. So I will just take you through the entire process, but with an example, so that maybe you can be able to identify with it. So this is not a real world case experience, but I've seen it happen a lot. what we do is we create, at times we create, when you're doing trainings, we create an environment, a virtual environment where people can be able to play around with this. So in this particular case, we have a company that has two servers, has the mail servers and has the server that does what I call it, file server. They have a firewall that if you have to access this firewall through the internet, you have to do that through a firewall. Then they did have a security policy in place whereby if you happen to get any suspicious emails, you are to report that information to the IT team, who would assess and then revert and give you what they think on it. So the part of the weakness is they didn't, the two internal servers, when you're assessing the company from an external network, you have to go through the file, but internally there were no security measures on each of the servers. So this is what the attacker was trying to do was affect the network, or try and how would I say, in a simple word, that you can all spam the network in a way that you're not able to access key resources of the company. So so I've explained what they had in place. So the first thing is, so there's a lady who gets a suspicious email. So she gets it from someone she didn't expect this email to come from. So this person rarely sends email, and they sent a picture of a ghost. So there are two aspects. This person, one, doesn't send frequent emails to him, and the subject of the email already was suspicious because it says a picture of a ghost. So I hope you can see it. Or do I need to go to full screen? Let me just change this. So it says the lady's name and says, attached is a picture I took of the person's ghost. I thought you would like it. And then they have attached a Word document. Yeah. So because this is a responsible employee and she follows the security policies laid, she forwarded this email to IT department. So from this perspective, we can see we have an educated workforce that know what is supposed to happen when they receive such suspicious emails. So at this point, remember, it's still an event. We've not noticed anything critical. So we want to take it to someone who has expertise, can be able to analyze and tell us whether there's actually a reason to be worried. So when they take it to the IT department, IT department is able to use some tools. Since I have some technical people in place, what we mostly use is something we call Wireshark, and we are able to analyze the packets of this email. So on analyzing this, we can be able to determine first how many number of people was this email circulated to within the company. So we were looking for a subject, a sent email that had a subject of picture of ghost, and then we filtered this data further down to something that was associated with the lady who had received the initial email. The other aspect that we wanted to assess at this point is you want to determine the original email that was sent to the lady. There's something we call hashing. And if something changes in a particular hash, you will be able to notice that it's not, how would I call it? It's not, if something changes and it's a hashed value, then you will definitely compute a different hash. I hope I am not being too complicated. So one of the things that we assessed is she forwarded an email to us, but we wanted to assess also the original email and where she got it from. So part of the things that we also did with that is we checked where the source of this email was, and we were able to see that this email is not a frequent sender. It's the email in itself was very malicious. So at this point, we want to also ensure who else in the company was this email sent to, so that even though Aria did not click on this email might have been circulated to someone else in the company that might have clicked on this. And in this particular case, part of the other 5 emails that was sent, there's actually someone who clicked into this into that attachment, the macros Word document, which managed to infiltrate some malware. So at this point, since we've identified that only one of the other emails that was sent to this particular, only one of them opened, and only that machine was infected. So we want to first remove this machine from the network, because we don't want this thing to spread into the network. The other thing that we did was try to see if there is any data that was really crucial that we have backed up, but outside the network. Some of the other things that you want to see is there any critical information that was in this machine that could have been accessed by the attacker. So at this point, we are just assessing how much damage has been done and how do we avert this damage. In this particular case, it's a bit easy because unlike Hazel, that one was more widespread. This was just one particular machine that we just had to remove and clean it up and then bring it back into the system. Then after you do this, I hope I didn't jump too fast into that. After you do this cleanup, you want to now, you just don't take back the computer into the network. You want to do testing before you take. What happened in this other case, the one I was telling you for the European company that was hacked twice, is they brought this particular how would I call it, the computer back into the network before they were able to test the aspect of remote. So there are certain systems that were not tested before they brought this back on. This computer back into, so they just tested what was affected within that scope. So part of the reasons why we do this containment bit is we want to identify what is the scope of the attack, how far has this attacker gotten into our system, so that you know what other aspects of the systems do I need to test when I'm bringing back my machine on board, so that I make sure that I have cleaned the entire process. So some aspect I really can't go into detail because then it depends. It's a scenario-based kind of assessment where you assess based on the scenario that you have in hand. But what you want to do is put this machine back into the system. What was it doing before that? Now, even though I bring it back, having made sure that I have cleaned it will not affect what was already going on in place. Then after that, you want to sit also and be able to assess why this happened in the first place. So we see, even though there's some employees that have an understanding that there could be malicious email, there's also another lot that does not have a clue on what happens, and they will click on anything malicious. You also want to assess at this point what I was talking about, the scope of the risk. How widespread is it? How can we make sure that it did not affect certain critical systems in the company, that we need to probably say we are having an outage of our services, because the more they stay in the network and they are infected, the more we are compromising our clients. This mostly happens for banks. There are just some systems they have to shut down if they are affected, because then it compromises every aspect of the customer. So then what do you do from what you have learned from this is, for this scenario, they had to probably evaluate the training that has been done. They probably had to see why this person felt prompted to click this link. What else did they do on the system? And at this point, you also don't want to be so harsh on your employees. You want them to have an understanding of why they should not do this. And also at the beginning, if an incident happens, it has happened. So the best thing is not to panic, but just see how best you can address that particular situation as it has come. Because when you panic, then you can't make any level-headed questions. So you have to be sober enough and calm and be able to say, okay, fine, this has happened. We had put measures in place, but it has happened. So how do we deal with it now that it has happened? Then as part of follow-up, and like what you want to do is want to continue monitoring the computer and knockup, because once they realize that that was the, once the hacker realizes this was the weak link in the company, they will always keep on trying to get more access, because they usually go through we move from something we call reconnaissance, which is just trying to convince someone to give us some information before we go to the hard stuff, which is now breaking into the system. So we exploit mostly the human weakness, which is what most people don't have a knowledge of. So you want to make sure that your employees understand this aspect. And even though they're coming back into the network, then you have clearly explained to them that this should not have happened. So with that, I think I will take any questions or comments and recommendations. Then so let me just, so I hope I kept time. Okay, it's 7:10. Okay. So
Terry,
yes,
good evening. How are you? This is Brian.
yes, Brian.
First, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for setting up this session just to share your knowledge with us. I think security is one of the key things that are imperative going forward, especially during this very difficult time.
Okay.
I think I was just reading something yesterday, and there's this report that says, I think phishing attacks have gone up 14,000% since COVID started. And also, I think in terms of working from home, 84% have increased. There's an increase of endpoints in terms of how people connect to their offices and things like that. So in terms of the attack surface, it's a very, very, very now big issue that's come up. But I think I just wanted to commend you, number one, and number two was also just to chime in. I think there's a gentleman called Alan I heard you talking about, in terms of just talking about their organization having some security plans or something that are at the top. I
Yes.
think it's very vital to mention that security is about, it's a culture. It's an organizational culture. So basically, if you really think about it, people are the main attack vector. So 50% of attacks happen through people. So if you look at security, I think the whole ecosystem constitutes of people, processes, and technology. And without people in that whole entire ecosystem, it's definitely useless, basically just focusing on processes and technology. So I think for Alan, it's imperative for the organization to seek leadership support. I think create a lot of security awareness across board, and to be able also to get a security posture analysis of their environment to understand where they are in terms of the matrix or in terms of the curve, so that they can strive to reach to a certain level on course of their day-to-day working.
Yes.
I think the other thing I really wanted to mention was, I think you really talked about something very critical and important around incident response. But I just wanted to add on top of incident response, I think it's very critical also to understand that security is about integrating various different elements in security. If you think about it, I mean, IT architectures consist of very many different elements around around the network, around the infrastructure, around applications, people, identity, and access. So all these different elements, I think if you bring them in together and maybe encapsulate them in something like security and event management, and couple that now with incident response, you can be able to get much more benefit out of really alleviating cybersecurity threats. Also, something else is around, I think, orchestration and automation, because if you look at the now amount of incidents, events that basically a human being is supposed to go through, I think a lot of this artificial intelligence helps us, number one, unearth very key trends that are already happening within our environments, and allow us also to collaborate with different experts that augment now your team in terms of uncovering these things. And I think finally, if you do a lot of orchestration and automation, it becomes very easy for you to now streamline repetitive tasks or time-consuming tasks. Of course, freeing your security staff with much more strategic priorities. So I think this is a whole topic that we have a lot to discuss, but I really thank you for taking this initiative, number one. But I mean, I think we can keep this forum moving. We can share a lot that we are already doing with other people and what knowledge we have. I think it's really imperative that we keep this going. So, but I just wanted to chime in that way. But thank you very much for your excellent delivery and collaboration with the other people on the call. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Brian. Oh, that's some good feedback. Mercy, kazi kwako. I like what Brian has tried to bring in place. It's the three aspects of cybersecurity. And whatever IT you're having in mind is the people, process, and technology and data. And now data is becoming such a big thing. So we no longer have the golden triangle. Now I can't remember what they are calling it because they're including data. So when you're thinking of your company, you need to think it around those aspects. And like he said, very rarely will you find that its systems are failing, but it's the people. So people are the most weakest links in any company. So that's what we experience. So I always advise on people to work more on the people before considering this aspect. But then all of them play a big part. The other thing he brought in mind is that security is such a big scope. I personally I am very specialized on application security, but there are other aspects. There's network, there's physical security. There are many modules into it, so it's such a wide range. And I must admit it was a very difficult one to prepare a presentation on. There's so many things we can discuss on this, and I like what he has suggested is as we keep the conversation going to ensure that we keep on discussing these things so that we enlighten people on what is happening. So thank you so much, Brian. Mercy, I'm going to allow you to come in and let me know which questions I need to address.
Okay.
Yes.
So before I add, maybe to reiterate is that also Hazel will be at the end of the month, the last session Hazel will be conducting. Hazel is actually she was the first CCIE in Kenya long time ago, and she'll be taking us through networks at the last session. So I encourage all of you to attend it. Next week, we'll be having the business continuity planning so that it can go hand in hand with this. In addition, BotLab does technology trainings in cybersecurity for executives and also for all employees regarding cybersecurity awareness. So feel free to reach out to us in case you feel you want to have that conversation. Sometimes we even have like a cybersecurity circle just to make sure that you start that process of having the conversation of security being brought forward. To go back to the questions, there was a question here by Alex. He said some of our organizations don't have dedicated security officers. They instead rely on one or two ICT officers to do everything: support, admin, security, configuration, etc. How would you advise such organizations or officers to deal with ICT incidences?
Understand it's a budget issue, and we want to have a small budget as possible. But even this, I like people who do a lot of ICT support, because then they're also able to know what's actually happening at any given time, because they work with these systems on a daily basis. So one is a challenge to your ICT team is that they need to gain some security skills. And in this day and age, you don't really need to be in a class. I think there's so much information out there. You just need to read and read widely. But also from an organization point of view, they need to probably pay for some certifications. Mercedes runs very nice cyber seminars, and it's a week, but it's compressed, and you can be able to get great insights from that. So one is you must have the initial, what do I say? You must have the initiative from a personal level to want to learn and understand what happens in the cyber bit, because you are at a very good position because you're doing most of the things first. The other aspect is to challenge organizations to empower the employees by taking them to this cyber security awareness training, because only then do they see also their value. The other aspect is at times you really don't need to have dedicated person to do this, but you can have someone on a, what they say, on a monthly outsource. You outsource to someone who manages your security bit of the company. But most organizations don't like to do that because of the amount of giveaway you need to give for that. So there are those three aspects, but we are yet to reach a point where people appreciate the need of having security. But slowly the culture is coming through, because we are seeing a lot of people getting hit. I always laugh at government websites, because even a typical HTTPS on their site to just show that this website is secure, they don't have. So it's, I mean, it really has to come. It must have a political will on its own, but then as organizations, we have to also do our part. So I hope I've answered the question.
Okay, the next question is, not a question, but maybe I can just reiterate.
Yes.
That Nikran was talking about. There was an email which was received by some of their staff, and the emails have been hacked, and that they're required to pay a certain amount so that the information will not be shared to the public. And the email and the money was to be paid via cryptocurrency. So what he did was that he deleted the email because it was a mere threat requesting for ransom of something, which didn't occur. But the staff panicked. How would you maybe encourage someone who's handling an incident to reiterate employee staff trust or client trust, especially after a breach? How would one be able to encourage to garner trust in such a way that they can continue using the particular platforms?
One of the key things is how you communicate. Did you pretend that this thing didn't happen? And when it's in the public eye, that is why now you're trying to address. So it's just a matter of how you communicate when the incident happened. And even when the incident was resolved, how did you communicate and tell them we managed to do this and we have put these measures in place to ensure that this is what will happen? So for me, that question is just on the incident handling. It's a communication kind of aspect. It's it's the relationship you have with your client and how you have built that relationship to a point where they feel, yes, you were breached, but I can trust you that you have taken measures to ensure that this will not happen again. So that one, in summary, I'll just put it as a communication kind of bit.
Okay.
On employees,
And
I think it's more of they need to constantly have this cyber security awareness kind of things. And yes, mistakes happen. So how they are reprimanded will affect how they will absorb this aspect of cybersecurity into what they are doing. So I think it's good to you just measure how best will you address this issue that is given to you based on what you had told them before, and now that it has happened, how do you respond now that it has happened? So if it's something that keeps on happening, then some action needs to be taken. But if it's a fast kind of occurrence, then you don't need to be so harsh on them. But I think it's more of the empowerment. How empowered are your employees to be able not to make these mistakes?
Okay.
I think there's someone who wanted to speak or something. I'm not sure.
I think it was Brian.
Okay.
yes, I think I just wanted to add another comment again to just say that I think as organizations we need to break away from having this thought of cyber security or corporate security or whatever people call it. IT security should be in technology. I think that is the big challenge that we have. I think most of the time with different organizations we work with, the practice we try and really do or engage in is to try and segregate this as a totally different kind of department. Why is this the case? Because I think it's very key for organizations to understand that there's nothing like having a limited or no budget for security. If you look at the average cost of an attack, this is worldwide. So it's about $1 million. I mean, that's just an average. If you go to some places, it's extremely high, higher than that, $10 million, $2 million, three. So basically, until a company goes through such a difficult time, I think it will be it's very unfortunate if we keep pushing back to IT, saying IT needs to do everything. IT already inundated with a lot of challenges around having a very extremely tight budget and I think a lot to do with that small budget year on year. So I think we need to find a way of sensitizing businesses, building those helping them build business cases around having cybersecurity as a separate aspect. I think IT is an enabler, but they should be people who are responsible for running the overall aspect of cybersecurity and risk management within an organization, because that's more than just technology. It's a day-to-day job, and IT are focused on support of the key critical mission, business critical systems within the environment. So I think that's just my comment. And I wanted to comment on something else, but I think I lost my thought process when there was too many people. I think there was a question, but I lost it somewhere. So I think that's just my 2 cents.
Okay. Thank you so much, Brian, for chipping in. I agree. I always say that sometimes to help break it down to non-technical people is to think about how most of us build houses. 90% of us start with a fence. Why? Because of security. You put up a fence, you put up a gate, you have a guard, you have CCTV and whatnot. All this is because of security. So the same thing has to be put in place in technology. So to enable most people to see whatever you have value of, or whatever you think is valuable to you, someone wants to steal, or someone wants to diminish whatever you're trying to do. So I always encourage non-technical people to think about the other aspects of security, because it can really affect, like you said, your brand, affect revenue, it can even crash your own business, especially if it's intertwined with data protection. Anyway, to go back to the question so that we can close, I see some of the questions have been answered by Norbert. Norbert, thank you so much for providing your expertise. Someone has asked a question: must one be IT qualified to manage cybersecurity in a company?
It's not necessary, but it would be more valuable if we have some IT background towards it. But I've seen people who've moved from marketing career and gone to cyber, and they do well. It's just a matter of passion and what drives you. So yeah.
Okay. And then also Norbert asked a question. With the new norm, how do you secure your environment against hackers using artificial intelligence, which maximize on zero-day vulnerabilities?
Well, that's a tough one, but I think Bran had tried to address this a bit. He was saying there's some processes that you can automate to basically be done by the machine. But in this day and age, I think most companies that are providing solutions, they are very keen to ensure that they're patching. For this 0-day kind of attacks, you just have to keep yourself informed on what is happening, so that if such an incident happens, then you're able to pull yourself out before. Because what happens in most 0-day attacks, the company that is offering that solution does not know that this happens. So there are other interested parties who get this information before. So if you are in a good network of people who are constantly informed, then it's one of the way you can avert some of things, because you're in the know and you're able to pull yourself out of the systems before it happens. But for that, really, there's really no, what would I say, proactive action you can take. I think it's just being knowledgeable on what's happening in the industry. Yes.
Terry, I
Yes.
think in regard to AI,
Yes.
I think what I mentioned earlier is basically if you have tools like, let's say, security information and event management tools,
Yes.
you can be able to basically use AI in terms of correlating different elements of events. Like if you get logs from from switches, from applications, from multi-factor authentication devices and things like that. And once you are able to have a database that can ingest both the structured and unstructured data, then you can be able now to use AI to be able to run through that amount of volume of data to be able to detect trends and be able to now demystify any threats that much faster. So that's what AI does, reducing that time consumption in terms of just going through large amounts of data. You can imagine if you're, for instance, I had someone talking about M-Pesa or Safaricom, you can imagine how many devices they have trying to use a normal eye to try and detect a threat. It's literally not possible. So I think if you're able to have a consolidated warehouse where you can be able to put in structured data and unstructured data and use machine learning or AI to be able to detect trends, that's how you can actually use this in security to solve your issues much faster than when you're using the normal eye. So I think there's a lot we can talk about around AI, but that's just like a top level.
Okay.
Hazel,
Yes.
sorry, Hazel, would you like to add? Hazel runs Tech Minds, and I know Palo Alto in Kenya has a platform where they use artificial intelligence to actually do mitigation and prevention. So maybe Hazel can say something if she's still there.
I don't know whether she's still here. I think I saw her leave. Okay, yeah, she's still here. We need to unmute her.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute you. It's raining so heavily here, it's hard to hear. Yeah, so in our case, one of the things we do as well is look at the security of networks. There's a lot that goes into just even making sure that easy things like passwords on your routers, what is the performance on your devices? Is it really high? Those are also some of the things that you might not be thinking about when you think about security. Just watching to see if there's a worm somewhere, is it then affecting your devices and looking at the performance of that? Like you mentioned, Mercy, in my session, I'll be talking about network audits and looking at how to at least look at that section of your network. The other thing too I can add is in Tech Minds, we also do pen testing and help people who've been hacked try and be proactive. And somebody else also mentioned, I think it was Brian, who said that security needs to be taken out of technology. I completely agree with that because I remember one client we worked with, actually HR was very, very involved when the hacking happened. It was a combination of HR, IT, and some scrupulous people. But HR had to know as well what was going on. And in order for us to change the policies of the company, HR had to be one of the ones that were communicating and telling people, this is what's going to happen. And if you're going to be one of the intruders, this is the kind of trouble you'll get into. And once they were involved in the communication, we saw a lot of that then changed. But again, thank you so much, Terry and Mercy, for setting this up.
Thank you so much, Hazel. I believe we've completed answering the questions. Yeah, we have. Brian, I think Njage would like to contact you. Kindly respond to her. And then thank you so much for everyone who tuned in from the various groups, from the Nazarene group, from the Safaricom Women in Business group, from the mini hackathon group, and all the people who follow us on Kictonet and Skunkworks and social media. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are thankful that you tuned into our session. Our next session will be next week. It will be by Gladys Njiru. She'll be talking about how to make your business continuity planning more effective. So it will be Tuesday next week, same time. Thank you so much. Feel free to check us out on social media and give us a review. Thank you. Have a lovely evening.